Welcome back to the channel and another 9/11 discussion. Today we're going to be talking about James Corbett's short documentary 9/11 War Games. And he put this out in 2018, I think. Once again, we find ourselves asking about coincidences. When is a coincidence not a coincidence? So, war games were going on September 11th, and war games had been going on prior to September 11th, simulating events that would happen on September 11th. We've seen this playbook before. Peter Power for the 7/7 bombings in London said on television, said on the BBC, that they were simulating an identical event at the same around the same time on the same day. And he has not to this day disclosed who was the client he was simulating the event for. Or in the case of the Boston bombing, where we have a simulation which then serves as the event. I'll put links to the two film club descriptions. I'll put links to those two film club discussions in the description, and I'll put cards up for them as well. Just have to give about a day or two for the stream to finish loading for those to come up. So, what was fascinating about this particular piece of evidence Corbett put forward was that we've seen this in other situations in which with the Oklahoma City bombing, for example, the governor's brother is writing a novel about a bombing in Oklahoma City, and one of the characters' names is Thomas McVeigh. And you ask yourself, how coincidence? So there's a TV series called The Lone Gunman, which is a spin-off of the X-Files. And the pilot episode involves a plot for the government to crash a plane in New York City to benefit the military industrial complex. When did this episode premiere? March the 4th, 2001. So the idea that no one had ever thought of it is silly. At least fictionally it had been thought of. In March of 2001, the ideas had been out there in the zeitgeist enough for it to percolate down into the minds of fiction writers for them to put forth a television episode in which this scenario is exactly envisioned. So how is it that a group of television writers could envision a scenario that the US government couldn't have? Well, it's because Rumsfeld, Rice, and Bush, they all lied. And Corbett plays the tape of them saying, well, no one could have ever envisioned such and such a thing could happen, that planes could be used as weapons, except multiple agencies practiced for that very eventuality. And Corbett gives the dates: November the 9th, 1999, June the 5th, 2000, October the 16th, 2000, October the 23rd, 2000. Multiple agencies practicing hijacking, planes going into the White House, planes going into the Statue of Liberty. In one of these scenarios, we even had military personnel flying on the planes to simulate this hijacking. We have another war game called Amalgam Virgo 01. The cover of the war game put a picture of bin Laden and 4 airplanes. So ask yourself, is it true that no one in the US government envisioned such an event when we have documentation, and that we have to have Rumsfeld, Rice, and Bush all lie? Say no one could have ever envisioned this could happen, except they had envisioned it, they had practiced for it, and they ran war games for it all the time. The war games running on the day of 9/11 itself: Northern Vigilance, which was related to Canada, Vigilant Guardian, hijacking and blowing up a plane over New York City, Vigilant Warrior, hijacking. So all of these things were going on September the 11th, such that there was confusion in many of the operators, both at the FAA and NORAD, as to what was real world and what was sim. And those famous recordings, is this real world or simulation? And at one point, we have audio of someone saying, turn your sims off. The sims here are where you have regular overflight, where you show where all the planes are, and the sims are computer programmed bogies, however you want to refer to them. These were the targets that were part of the simulation. So at one point, the guy says, turn your sims off. There were two different numbers given in the documentary, but I think they were citing other people. 22 or 29 possible hijackings going on that day. For example, United Airlines 177 was listed as hijacked, but it was still on the ground at the time of that alarm. Continental Flight 321, Continental's an airline that merged with United, for people who don't recognize that, sent out a squawk for hijack, wasn't hijacked. Korean Airlines 85 also indicated codes that it was being hijacked. None of these were actually hijacked. Were they part of a simulation, or was their programming put in to make sure that they would seem that they were being hijacked so as to confuse everybody? All of these planes were engaged in these war games. That is one plausible reason why they were not able to engage. But the idea that all of US airspace, which was pretty quickly cleared, was not able to deal with these four planes. It turns out even that American 11 was considered still airborne by a couple controllers. They're playing the audio after it's crashed in to the World Trade Center. They're saying, "Oh, we still are tracking American 11 possibly heading towards Washington, D.C." And this doesn't account for the fact that Flight 93, the one that apparently crashed in Pennsylvania, 2 hours was just flying around out there, no interceptions. Where were these planes? So we have more lies. General Myers, who was the chief of Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, he said, "Well, NORAD isn't in charge of this; the FAA is." Except that's not true. NORAD is in charge of the aviation security of the United States and has primacy in a situation like this. They can coordinate with the FAA, but Myers is trying to make excuses when NORAD was not only coordinating the war games, but was making sure that these planes were not intercepted. Then you also have an Air Force General Eberhart. James has already dealt with him in a previous different story, but I think under 9/11 suspects. But he says, he's being asked by the 9/11 Commission, what do you think was the significance of the fact that you were running war games at the same time there was an actual attack on America? And he said, well, at the most, it only cost us 30 seconds. And in fact, it probably enhanced our response. But all of the evidence goes against this. And when we're thinking about all of these coincidences, you have to keep asking the question, what is this related to? Because our previous live stream, we talked about Follow the Money, 9/11 trillions. We've talked about Dancing Israelis. We've talked about Building 7. All of these things should indicate to you there are so many holes in the official story, in the official narrative. It doesn't, again, mean that we have a comprehensive explanation of these are the parties who did it, these are the reasons why they did it, and here's how they profited. But what we can see is in pockets and in pieces, you could say through a glass darkly, you can see that what we're being told is a lie. And that there are people who profited from what appeared to be a spectacular attack against America. They profited financially, they profited militarily, they profited in creating an atmosphere in which you could then pass legislation to surveil the population more and make sure you clamp down on anyone who dissents from what you're putting forward as the official story. So fascinating. Again, a short watch. I don't even know if it was an hour altogether. So if you're coming to this live stream and you haven't had a chance to watch it, I strongly encourage you. It's not even an hour. And for me, as I say, the coincidence that I most love in this documentary is there being a television show that aired in March of 2001, which revolved around a plot in which the government crashes a plane in New York City to benefit the military-industrial complex. I mean, I don't know what else I can say there. But all of these coincidences, all of these war games happening on September 11th itself, simulating events similar to what was happening, almost exactly what was happening on 9/11, lay this over with what happened on 7/7 in London, simulating events that actually happened on that day. the mathematical probability of such a thing is low. The mathematical extremely low, like I think in the trillions. But the probability of both of those things happening in separate cases, I'm sure you just multiply the probability by each other. That's how little that's possible. That events that were events simulating what was going to happen happening on 7/7, events simulating what was going to happen on 9/11, both happening, both being admitted publicly, not a conspiracy theory. Peter Power said it on the BBC, and these people testified to this happening to the 9/11 Commission. Not a conspiracy theory, it's just there. Yeah, exactly. Someone's putting in the chat, is this real world or exercise? That is one of the audio that we hear. And that's because the people who were involved in the war games that day, perfectly, I think, innocent people who were just at their jobs, they were working in air traffic control or they had some other role at the FAA, they were participating in exercise and they were confused. What, there's planes being hijacked in New York, but I thought we were doing an exercise about that. So keep watching. We're going to continue to look at other documentaries that James Corbett has done on 9/11. But at this point, if there's still some kind of denial in people's mind that the official story is inaccurate, I just don't think you've taken a hard enough look at, at the situation. All right. That's all I have to say today. Are there any questions, comments in the chat? People who watched it, people have further questions about 9/11, happy to answer that. Otherwise, I will wrap up and start to do prep for Palestine Bookshelf, which will be premiering in about 18 minutes. We're going to be discussing a documentary about Benjamin Netanyahu, which I it's one of those times, I'm the one who puts out these film club topics. I'm the one who asks you to watch them. And then I find myself in the position of, I don't want to watch an hour about Netanyahu. But the reality is you have to know your enemy. And I slogged through it, and some positive points, bits of information to take away, which we'll be talking about. Also, we'll be talking about the launch of the new Kiva team for Palestine Bookshelf. If you don't know about Kiva, it's a micro lending platform, but I'll save those announcements for the Palestine Bookshelf discussion. Also interesting to see this week, my book review on Why Empires Fall was my most watched book review in, I think, 3 or 4 months. When I say most watched, I mean in a period of 24 hours, by far and away. And I wondered if maybe the audience for this main channel has somewhat stabilized finally after breaking off and creating Palestine Bookshelf last October. So we'll see. To be seen. What's your favorite Dune? It's the first one for me. There's no question. I have made the argument that I think Herbert's writing declines in the later books. I don't mean catastrophically declines. More of a gradual decline. But part of that is you can't escape that the first book introduces you to the Dune universe and gives you all of the tricks that I'm going to use the word tricks, techniques, devices that he uses. And so they're not new in the later books. They're still wonderful in their own way. But for me, and that's a book I can categorically recommend to everybody. Say, if you're interested, you don't have to be a science fiction person. I think you'll really appreciate this book. Whereas all the other books somewhat partake from having to have read the first one. So it's hard for me to say, oh, read Children or read Heretics, and you'll get it. In some ways you can, but you have to start with the first one. So I hope that answers your question. And I only see characters for your name. So if you can phonetically tell me how to pronounce your name, I can say your name when I feature your chats. Super chat for $2 from JM. Thank you, JM. I appreciate that. David. Okay. Thank you, David. All right. Any other 9/11 questions, or I'll field general channel questions at the moment. I'll as we're approaching very slowly 10,000 subs on the channel. Probably do a general Q&A about books in general, about my life in general. But we're getting there. It is, as I say, the channel is stabilizing as to what it is after having taken on Palestinian books for a year. We brought on an audience who is not necessarily interested in the other things I have to say, which is fair enough. That's why I didn't want to confuse people. We've created that other channel, and that channel is also stabilized, but is growing in its own way. Interestingly, because of Substack as well. Substack is an interesting platform, and I'm enjoying getting to know people on there, and I'm having to do more writing because obviously it's a writing based platform. We'll have to have a general religion discussion sometime. Yeah, maybe we'll do that at the 10,000 subs discussion. But we'll see how fast we get there. I think we may get there before summer starts. Who knows? It just depends on how these videos go. Realistically, subscriber count is down to the quality of the videos you're putting out, and I think virality of some. So the Dancing Israelis video has brought, I would say, at least 1,000 subscribers to the channel on its own since it came out 2 or 3 months ago. It's a very popular topic. People are apparently searching for Dancing Israelis on YouTube every day. I don't know why. All right. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by. As I say, please take a look at the description to get a link to watch the documentary if you haven't. It's excellent. If you'd like to join me to talk about the Dark Overlord of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, will be doing a discussion over at Palestine Bookshelf in about 13 minutes. So feel free to join us over there. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.